Okay.
All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the Utah Indigent Defense Commission. It's kind of a work group meeting. It is April 29th, 2021. Time is 1:11 now. And we have a bunch of different people who are already on, but I understand we don't have to go through because people always have access to who's part of this meeting. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. And I see that those have been provided for us in our materials. So if there's someone who has had a chance to look through those and making sure there's no typos and that it's accurate, I will take a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. Wally.
I'll second it.
Very good. Let's see, who said the second? Was that you, Michael?
Yes.
Michael Zimmerman is the second on that. Great. Thank you so much. The minutes are approved. All right. And then let's see, next on the agenda is just our staff helping us to get going with discussion.
Just for the record, that was not an official vote because we don't have a quorum. So that was a recommendation to if and when we get a quorum that these should be approved and review it again.
Okay.
So we're just one away from a binding vote.
Very good. Yes, thank you for that. Ryan, good to see you. Thank you. Good.
Okay. Let me just get to the right screen.
If anyone needs the materials, Joanna can put it in the chat again, but she did put it in the chat, plus it was in another email previously.
Prepare to be soothed by my soothing PowerPoint introduction screen.
Yeah, it's nice.
Feel very calm.
Yeah.
And to
Wow.
I did not find your notes. That's why I was late. I was scrambling to try to find the invitation.
You mean the materials?
Yeah.
In the calendar invite, but my staff will send it to you right away or put it back in the chat so you can click on it. Pretty pleased staff looking at you.
Yeah, that'll be great, Michael. Let's make sure you get that.
Sorry about that, Michael. I know it's a little confusing with the back-to-back meetings.
No problem.
Oh, here's the chat. Yeah, so it should be in there. It's in there from 3 different people. Thank you, everyone, for jumping to attention. Okay. We have
Is that okay, Michael? See it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Very good.
So we have a bit of a review of last time, just to remind us all where we are, right? We need this work group to consider those intents to apply that were filed and the tier designations so that we can then send out the actual applications with as much information possible about what funding we have allocated and what they will likely get funded so that our applications are hopefully as specifically tailored as possible and we don't have to do cutting further. There may be some wiggle room around that because of the tier 3 items, but we'll talk about all of that. So that's just the timeline of our future. Today, go through that managing defender priority again, just to remind us all. Look at our process for the tier designations and some of the built-in assumptions, and then decide on percentages of our funding for each tier. And then look at those tier 3 categories. And then finally, since after we go through all those decisions, just note anything we want to make sure to include on the IDC grant application to make sure we're giving notice to everyone of the things that we've. Can it be? It is a quorum. Look at that. Michael Drexel to the rescue.
Great. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
No, we're happy to have you. You are the critical 8th vote.
Perfect.
Should we go back to the minutes really quickly so we make sure those approved?
Yes, we did have a non-binding vote to approve the minutes. Is there anyone who's had a chance to look at those minutes who wants to vote nay on the approval of the minutes now that we have a quorum? Okay, sounds like they're good.
Yeah, they are official. We'll go back to this. There it is. Okay, so Michael, we were just going through agenda for today and what we are here to do. As a reminder, we went through the intent to apply process and got 7.35 million in requests for our 5.6 approximate IDC grant funding that is available. So this process is really meant to figure out how we prioritize funding so that we can message the people applying for these things, whether they will or will not get that funding. Back to a quick review of our priority goal, that focusing on building that principle one, institutional capacity, the organization of these 29 county systems that have not traditionally been not perfectly organized, but had more than independent contractors, with the glaring exceptions of Salt Lake County and Utah County, and focusing on our funding priority of building principle one by building managing defenders and their capacity to really organize and communicate with us about the system. That we know that means making some tough decisions now about things we can fund now, but hopefully we will be able to fund in the future. Again, these are those grant priorities that we have communicated to systems and that we have made clear are the priorities of the IDC, and they will be in the application again. And I'm just talking, but please interrupt me at any and all moments if this is unclear. Most of it is review so far, but it will get more complicated. So.
Hey, Joanna, I do have a question. The final applications are due May 20th. Can a system make a change in a designation between now and then? I mean, we have an intent to apply, but if a system were to make a change, how would, like to say, we think that we now may have some ideas about a different funding that may fit into a different tier. How would that, and what would that look like, and how would that impact our meeting today?
I am going to put a big star by that question and a box and a circle around it, because I want to get back to it once we have it in context. And I know for a fact, Leslie Howitt will not let me forget to answer that question. So I'm putting a pin in that. It's really important, Rich, and I think we have a plan for that. And it will make more sense once we get it all in context. Okay, this is background. So we received the intents to apply after having collaborative meetings with all these systems. The process we went through about their request for, so exactly what Rich is talking about. He's a system, he applied, he designated his items tier 1, 2, or 3. Staff went through it, reassigned some tiers, made some assumptions, and we want to make sure that's all clear to everyone and to get your approval on it. Look at this, we're just overflowing with a quorum. Hi, Mary.
Hello.
Okay. We're doing a little review of the process, Mary, that after we received the intents to apply, how we identified tiers and identified items. So they were asked to identify the tiers, just what Rich was talking about. We ended up redesignating around 60 of those to different tiers based on our understanding of those tier priorities. This is a breakdown of the ones that were moved: compensation increases, defense resources, new social worker contracts, and then attorney contracts that were not specifically designated to that first priority of reducing and managing defenders' workload. So this resulted in several things being moved to different tiers, mainly to tier 3 from tier 1 or 2. So we want to make sure we have eyes on that process and approval for it so that we don't do things without full transparency. So in moving those tiers, these are the assumptions we built into it. Number one, if you are renewing a request for a person, whether it's a contract or a rich employment person, those people are generally designated tier 1 or tier 2, depending on your system. So tier 1 are regional systems or large counties, 1 and 2 counties of the 1st and 2nd class. Tier 2 is counties of the 3rd through 6th class who have a managing defender and something to benefit the capacity of the managing defender. We did that because we presume it would disrupt a lot if we were to cut people based on this new funding organization. That is a built-in assumption that we made, and that you should understand as part of the process. If though, and this goes back to those tier relocations that we did, if renewal requests were for defense resources mileage or compensation increases, we did not assume they were tier 1 or 2. We moved them to tier 3. And then about 17 of 23 requests for new people were moved to tier 3. And the reason why 17 of 23, the remaining, that's 6, right? Difference? No, sorry, 320. The people who were not, that we didn't have to move were already appropriately designated. That's Joanna trying to do basic algebra on the fly and feeling insecure. So we didn't have to move those to tier 3. They were already there, but of 17 of them, we did move them to tier 3. Have I lost everyone or anyone at this point? Are we all still at least vaguely following?
I got it.
Okay. Adam's on board. He will speak for all of you unless you interrupt him. Okay. I debated the helpfulness of this slide, but what I really want you to see with, and I did it for tier 2 and then tier 3, so we break them down. So this is really a summary of those items that are in your materials, right? And how they break down. So the total tier 1 request after all of this process is that 4.4 million. And that is broken down into 3.8 in renewals and 633 in new requests. So a couple of examples there at the bottom of what these new requests would be and why they are in tier 1 or 2 respectively. I'm sorry, tier 1. So it's the thing that I think is most notable about this is we aren't getting requests for the moon. We're getting requests for the very specific items that we talked through with them, right? In the past, we've gotten requests for a lot of things that were a little bit more helter-skelter, and this is really pretty focused, right? Attorneys, managing defenders. This coordinator is specific to Salt Lake County, and that you see in your materials, but is similar resource to managing defenders as other support staff requests. That's tier 1. Thoughts, questions? I think the math is done correctly. Greg's sitting there recalculating it for me, I know, to make sure it's all correct, but Greg, I went through it. Okay, we get tier 1 and the funding breakdown. This is important because that 4.4 number, if we decide to approve tier 1 as requested, that's the vast majority of our funding, right? So make sure we understand tier 1. I don't mean to sound condescending, but it's taken me a long time to understand this. So I want to make sure I'm translating it really accurately to bridge the process and the deciders. So tier 2 ends up being our smallest category, and that's generally because smaller systems, smaller asks, but still really important, right? New managing defender in Grand County. Some of these new requests you see are in those categories that we moved to tier 3, right? Attorneys, but these are attorneys that are specifically designated in the intent to apply as helping the managing defender's caseload. Okay. Do we feel like we get tiers 1 and 2? We're still with Joanna. You guys are you're making $5.6 million worth of decisions based on all of this. So that's why I'm making sure you're following me. We've never had that dollar item associated with your decisions. So based on our priorities, based on the assumptions we built in, based on the asks, this is how tier 3 breaks down. We don't have enough money to fund all of that. But as we discussed last meeting, there are some ideas about things we can eliminate and completely say no to, and then things that we may be able to find other funding for. I actually reached out to the governor's office, and they are willing to consider some of our requests from the very top, from the state funding for, what is the title of the new Federal Funding Relief Act? That one?
American Rescue Plan.
Thank you. The American Rescue Plan funding. So I will when we get to tier 3, remind you to tell me which ones you think are most amenable to that application, and we'll file that application. So that's some hope that we won't have to deny all of these requests, but we will have to deny some. It doesn't mean they're not important, right? Margaret's having trouble hiring delinquency attorneys. That compensation increase would probably really help.
And child welfare.
It's child welfare, not delinquency.
Well, no, it's both. I've got trying to fill one of each.
Well, we also know
But the
that-
IDC one is delinquency.
we know how important those parental defense social workers are. We know how important an investigator is.
I think there's an argument to be made that the social workers actually do increase the capacity of the managing defenders by, well, one, they reduce caseload simply with the cases that they're on and the work that they do with the cases. Two, they really have a unique perspective on how the attorneys are working in the cases, how the clients are being served, how how core principles are being followed. So we have to have them in tier 3, but I think that they provide a lot of good capacity.
This is an issue we talked about quite a bit, Margaret and everyone, because it certainly, we believe they improve practice and the effectiveness of the attorneys. But the question we were trying to balance is for that managing defender on the in the organization role, does the social worker actually reduce that person's caseload or workload in a way that allows them more time to do the management function? I mean, we came up with, the staff, we came up with an opinion, doesn't mean it's right for the very reason that you just said. And I think that applies to a lot of these things on tier 3, which is why we really need the guidance.
And there are some built-in unfairness parts, right? We're saying we'll renew the existing social worker, right? It really is a matter of, we can't fund everything. And so sticking to these tiers and the priorities we set was the way that we followed the elimination and reorganization of things to get the highest priority items funded. But I don't disagree with you.
No, absolutely. I agree with that.
But I don't disagree with you.
I think this is where we're at this year. So I think was a good judgment call.
It doesn't mean it was easy or straightforward. So I don't know if we want to take votes. We're asking for, Leslie, is it 2 sets of votes or 3? I can't remember. We can either take votes in sections, or I can go through it all and then we can come back and take votes. You want to see the whole presentation and then I'll come back to this vote?
That would be my opinion, but
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
And this vote is really just asking you to approve or reject those assumptions that I have just walked through for you. So we can go through them again if you would like to, and I will go through them. Once we do that, the next task is to then determine how we're going to fund those tier levels that you've just approved, if you've approved them. So presuming you've approved them, that's what this next section is built on. So the question is, for all tier 1 items, are we assuming that they will all be funded the same? That's a pretty critical assumption and one that we've built into this process, but it doesn't mean you necessarily have to fund them all at 100%. The box above says, look, you could fund each tier 1 item at 80%, which would mean that the county is either left or system is left funding the remaining 10,000 difference, or the person, if it's a person, just gets paid that much less, or the defense resources are just that much less. If, on the other hand, you do decide to fund tier 1 and 2 because they are your priorities at 100%, that's what the second box looks like. And it leaves that smaller amount, 238,000 for this 1.9 in tier 3 funding. There may be other sources of funding there, but that would be all the funding that we could donate, or not donate, appropriate from our funding. I see a raised hand, very polite, Michael. You must be a former Supreme Court justice. Oh, but you have to unmute yourself so we can hear you. There you go.
There, they just interrupt. Question, if we decide to fund percentages of requests, local governments are also getting some of this Rebuild America money, right?
Yes, that's
Wouldn't
true.
it make sense to suspect that they are going to have some extra revenue also?
I can shed a little light. So for example, Davis County is supposed to get about $69 million, and we anticipate that we will. We do not yet have the federal guidelines. The Treasury and the state don't want us to make any decisions until we get guidelines. The only guideline so far is that it can be used to supplant lost revenue to the government from the pandemic. So we're just hoping. We have had meetings, and perhaps other counties have had meetings about all the things that we see that need help from this money. And so there's a lot of examples of that. Health and Human Services is still, especially Human Services, a really big deal. We have criminal justice as a category in our county because we are told by our people in our system that there's a tsunami that has already started with the opening up of jury trials. So, and we had about 5 categories. So for 5 categories, we divvied it, we're starting to have little discussions about each of those 5 categories and research to figure out what all our problems still are. So there will be competition for sure with the funding that we are going to receive, if that makes sense. First, it sounded like a lot of money, and then we just realized if we divide that equally among 5 different categories, we'll still be making choices on what gets money and what doesn't get money.
Chair, if I may, on the city level, South Jordan's about a city of 80,000, and that amount of money is about 6 million for us. And again, we're waiting till we get the guidance because we've been told don't go spending money yet. So we haven't had many conversations, but I'm sure the same issues will come up. And I'm sure city managers and county managers will have lots of operational needs they would like to throw that money to also. But that gives you a perspective. 80,000 people, around $6 million, and then the county was how much? We
were 69 million, and we probably have 335,000 people in Davis County. Yeah, and a ton of need in human services for sure, but also criminal justice.
And each one of the Davis County cities will also be receiving their equivalent amount. So Layton about the same size as South Jordan, probably about the same. There's a list out there that I can find if you want to see it.
And yeah, you were right. 15 cities in Davis County. So when we add up all of the different amounts that they are getting per their population, there's about 110 million. And there are there's 10 state kind of principles that have been shared so far. And those are kind of helpful, but it's still not Treasury guidance. And we definitely hope to be able to leverage some of these amounts of money for both the city, the county, and the state to make great use of it.
And I've heard some of the state money might be made available to cities or counties for matches.
Yeah.
So if we use some of our 6 million, the state might give up some of their, I can't remember how many hundreds of millions they got, but there's lots of discussion going on, and I haven't been privy to much, but that's one thing I've heard.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question I was raising is strategically, should we assume that there's going to be more money in our grantee agencies that will enable them to make up some of what we might have to trim if we're going to cover the requests? Now, I recognize if I'm a grantee agency, I'm going to say this is one-time money, and I don't.
As one agency, I would say, yes, there's money there. One, we don't know for sure we could spend it. We probably can. I'm guessing Treasury will say this is something we could spend it on. And then two, yeah, it'd be one-time money. But I think we could. The Treasury guidance is going to be the big deal for at least the attorney for South Jordan.
Yeah, it's the big deal also for everyone at Davis County, most especially clerk auditor, who will have to answer to how all the powers that be.
I'm not getting the sense that that money is going to be available.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Well, I
I
can,
would guess it will be. It'll be a fight for it. We just don't know. And I don't know when that guidance is coming.
we thought it would have been here by now. They're just taking forever. It's ridiculous.
The only other thing I would add to that is we set the priority of a managing defender. And so if we were to not fund something that we set a priority for, it would be a harder message to then get back to a city or county that they should fund it. Whereas the tier 3 items, the defenders really, as Margaret articulated well, understand the importance of and could make that argument on their own independently to their cities and counties potentially more effectively. Because I would say that we don't have 100% universal across the board agreement on the managing defender position with local officials yet, but I guarantee if we build it, they will come. But I would take that into consideration.
That's
John, I saw your email from about an hour ago about the state potential match for the federal funding. I'm wondering what tier 3 items that we think we could fall under those guidelines and for that funding. I mean, I think there's certainly a strong argument to be made that, you know, indigent defense representation and services are essential.
Yep, I have that as an item to discuss when we get to tier 3 for sure.
Fantastic. I'll just sit quietly then.
No need, please don't, but I will not forget to get to that. And if I do, you will definitely not sit quietly. You will remind me. But I think it's a good discussion to have.
Oh, there's just one other thing that has been mentioned before by one of our commissioners who's been a county commissioner. And that is that just the way that counties throughout the state look at this money and use this money and consider this money, it varies with as many, almost probably as many counties as there are. So, yeah.
Hi, Michael, do you know if the courts are applying for any of the federal money?
Yeah, we are. We've got a request in for almost $11 million. Plus, there's a few legislators who are interested in seeing federal money used to build a courthouse in Sanpete County in Manti.
That one. It is a really small, uncomfortable courthouse, and we can all agree.
I think just anecdotally, I think that's a good example. I've heard of cities wanting to build senior centers, other things with that money. There will be huge competition, I think, because they're going to want to do one-time big investments that live for a long time, like a building or something. Taylorsville City already remodeled its city hall based on the earlier CARES money, which I don't know if it was legal, but I'm not their attorney.
If Michael were still here, I would ask the follow-up question whether any of that money that the courts are requesting is due to the backlog in cases, because if it is, that would tie nicely into our request for the federal funds to meet the court's backlog in cases and advancing jury trials.
There is some ongoing review. Sorry, somebody was talking to me from the door. There's some ongoing review being made about what resources we need to tackle the backlog. In fact, those conversations are unfolding even over the last day and a half or two. The ones that we've submitted so far are not specifically about that, other than to try and create some additional technological changes that help us process cases more quickly with the remote hearings, and leveraging senior judges to do that while the district court judges are tackling more trial work. So it's kind of all interrelated.
So Joanna, I have maybe some food for thought as we go through this process that hopefully doesn't throw a monkey wrench into this process. But you know, as we were sitting in that bail reform meeting the other day, you know, what was informing a lot of that meeting is kind of what happens in rural Utah and the thoughts and the needs that they have, which are critically important. But if we look at the main population centers, that's where most of the action relating to what happens in a court, what happens in a jail, and most certainly what happens from an indigent defense perspective. You know, as I was looking, this morning, I went pretty carefully through these IDC grants. And in some systems, the IDC, I know there is not a supplanting requirement, but the IDC is funding somewhere between 20 and 40% of the overall indigent defense budget, which granted, I think is critically important. And I looked at the percentage that was funded in Salt Lake County, which has, I'm just talking about my office and not Pam's or Lisa or Lawkins. And we're funded at somewhere under 2%. You know, and we handle about 28,000 files a year in our office. And I'm sort of wondering how we think that should inform kind of this debate and where we put the resources. Granted, and I admit that Salt Lake is pretty well funded. And it sort of goes back to the question that I asked at the beginning, because as I sit here thinking, certainly my office with nearly 100 lawyers has a lot more management capability that we could utilize, as opposed to maybe thinking about CAFA. And you and I know CAFA is like critically important. We really want to get that right, because it not only will help what we do here, but it will inform the entire debate relative to bail reform. And so I'm sort of sitting here kind of thinking, how do we address those issues? Because I think it's critically important. I mean, we fund about 20% of Utah County. As I counted, about 30% of Cache County. And that's important that we do that. But it is sort of it gives those systems that capability to do that. But it really is the state stepping in what one might argue might look like a disproportionate funding for one group over another. And I think that should inform our conversations as we go forward, even though I voted for all of that, and I think it's critically important that we do that. And certainly there's management capacity that is totally necessary. And we've talked about that too. And so I just throw that out there as food for thought as we go forward and look at, and as we're trying to prioritize thinking about those sorts of things. Do I think things in Sevier County are critically important, in Juab, Millard, and San Pete that have like a joint application? Yeah. But yet at the same time, it's a pretty significant percentage of the indigent defense costs that we're covering for those groups.
I want to add something quickly too, if I can, Lorraine. I think Rich's point is really important. I'm sure we've all considered it. But the other thing that comes to my mind is, how do we help systems respond to some need that's created by another entity, right? So Southern Utah 5th District, the court creates another judicial position. There's another judge. The county funds prosecution. They don't fund defense necessarily. Now, Washington County did increase that, but some of the others aren't. That kind of process is something we have to figure out what really is the role for the IDC to take on, as opposed to a request to come specifically from a county or a requirement for a county. How do we balance those things? It goes more, again, rather to that need question and what our priority has to be.
Yeah, Rich, I think, again, it's the core to who we are and what we fund and how we work, right? If you track the 5 years we've been, almost 5 years we've been doing this, we've faced that decision all along, right? Juab County, the first grant, it was well more than their budget. And we started off with that model. And we didn't start off with everyone getting just a percentage funding based on their budget, right? That would have been one approach. We could have just said, hey, everyone, 247 cities, 29 counties, here's a percentage of your indigent defense budget that you are entitled to. And that's the way other systems do it. They just do a flat percentage. I think what we know about Utah is that the rural counties had higher, steeper climb, not that it's a less important or more important climb. And Rich, I've had this issue all along too about counsel at first appearance and how I mean, Leslie will tell you, she's yelled at me about 6 times that it's not important. It just isn't our priority this year. And in order to get counsel at first appearance in Cedar City, in Carbon County, in Uinta, in the places across the state, we have to have this managing defender in place to be able to organize that. We can't just fling Wally Bugden in Cedar City, right? And say, go show up at first appearances. Wally's great, and even though he's retiring, would surely do it for us. But how's it going to know when first appearance calendar is, who to report to, how to fit in the system, right? So the goal of this managing defender is to have that key to these other things, and then going forward to be have a much more closely tied request to the additional items they need. And Rich, your systems are a step ahead, right? Because you can already do that. And it's an inherent unfairness. That being said, I think the discussions in the bail reform are really important. Representative Lisenby wrote me back and said she's been thinking about it nonstop and wants to think about how to fund it. So I think we use that opportunity and run with it and see if we can articulate a separate funding amount for this very thing and call it a pretrial services and first appearance funding group so it doesn't compete with our grant money. I'm going to try and finish this up and then we can make those really difficult decisions. The other option, Rich, if you want to persuade the IDC not to then undo what I just said, is we could do proportional funding, right? We could do 50% of tier 1 items, 50% of tier 2, and then more of tier 3. That's available. And that's what this slide is really meant to say. And as we come back to this and decide, Leslie has a tool to visualize this. If you decide X, that means there's this much left for Y. So let's do that. We will eventually need to make these votes so that we can then communicate that to systems and tell Rich, Pam, and others, this is the percentage of tier funding available for your tier 1 requests, tier 2 requests, and tier 3 requests. And then the last thing we're going to need to go through is then how we prioritize and what we prioritize of tier 3 requests. So that's Margaret's question. What things might be most amenable to federal funding? What things do we flat out not want to fund? And how do we communicate that to counties? And that's what will come to this final decision about what needs to go in the application about everything we've decided today. Okay, so you have a whole overview. I'm going to run back unless I get interrupted by anyone wanting me to stop at any of these.
And I don't want you to stop, but I do think, wouldn't it be strange if we set out these tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and then we fund them as though the tiers weren't important, like the tiers weren't going to govern the allocation largely? I mean, it seems to gut the purpose of having tiers if we move away from them for funding purposes.
Can't see it, but Leslie's jumping for joy as you say that, Michael. Go ahead.
Well, I wonder, as you say, the tier 3 items perhaps are more amenable to local funding and advocacy by people on the ground locally. This whole business with putting management in place so that you can work towards first appearance counsel and things like that. Those are overarching goals that we have that I'm not the least bit sure we can expect at the local level will be made the first priority. So I'm kind of with Mike Drexel, these are our priorities. And if we were just going to issue percentage of request, take a pot and divide it up based on how much everybody wanted, you wouldn't need an IDC.
I think the two Michaels are exactly right. I mean, I think it's appropriate for us to be able to say these are our priorities and that's the way we're going to fund. And what Michael Zimmerman just said is exactly right. back to Joanna wanting to be able to staff first appearances, that's going to be a low priority, and local governments are not going to feel obligated to fund an issue like that. That just isn't going to catch their attention, in my opinion.
Well, and I think if we go back and look at the study that was done by the Sixth Amendment Center, I would be surprised if many of the trial judges who are not having counsel at first appearance think it's a problem. They probably think they're just dealing justly with people's plea agreements and moving them through, and and we all know that those result in convictions that show up later. So I think it's highly unlikely, as Wally says, that at the local level, that's going to be a magnet for money.
To circle back to Rich's question about what if we vote on these tier amounts and then there are needs for changes in the system. I feel like I want Leslie to explain this because this one I don't. So we will vote on a tier funding percentage, Leslie, right? You unmute and interrupt me, or just take over on the explanation of tier changes once we've made the votes.
Yes. Wait, on tier changes. So there are a couple of things that we need to discuss within a couple different buckets. So one is whether you agree with that assumption that all renewals should be tier 1 and tier 2. The second is you have the item list. You had it at last weekend's meeting. We made a couple typo updates, so it's now in the materials, saying, do you agree with the way we have designated these tiers? And so making sure we have room for discussion on whether any of those items you feel like fall into a different tier than they are listed as. And then thirdly is this idea of going through and setting that percentages for each tier, especially tier 1 and tier 2. I think we have some wiggle room on tier 3 later. And for that, when we get to that, I have an Excel sheet that will let us play with that in real time. So if you guys say we want 90, 80, 50, we can look at what that looks like. I've got it broken into categories. So if you say, we don't want to fund anything of this category, we want everything of this category as 100, we can see how that actually aligns with how much money we have.
But to Rich's specific question, if once we do all that, Rich and or any other system says, actually, we had something has come up, something has changed, our tier 3 request is now tier 1, and here's the explicit justification for it with data, documents, and all the proof you ever wanted.
So the way we're thinking is probably best to go about this, although we'd love input, is first of all, to communicate to systems that we would prefer that your request not deviate from the intent to apply, but if they do, talk to us. Like, don't just apply out of the blue, come talk to us, help us understand why these changes might have occurred. With that, I don't foresee that there would be a ton more tier 1 or 2 requests, purely because there aren't that many things that fall into those piles. Like, those are very specific needs for how to increase managing defenders. And so in the whole state, there just aren't that many requests for that, and there wouldn't be that many more that have been requested. Whereas in tier 3, that's a much more varied pile. And so it is possible that people will apply for more of those. And so that's why under one of these options that we could choose, it would be saying things like tier 1 and 2 will be fully funded. Tier 3 items, we will have to wait and see how much change there will be, and then come back to you and communicate later what the funding for tier 3 items is going to look like. So that's an option we could choose that would allow for a little bit of that wiggle room in the applications while communicating, like, please don't wiggle too much.
Rich, do you feel like that's a satisfactory answer to your question?
Yeah. So if we have some ideas, we'll contact you.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's a different process, right? And we know it's hard. And one of the things we struggled with is once we tell you a system that your item is tier 3 because you didn't necessarily designate it appropriately, what incentive do you have not to redesignate it? And that's fair. And you are talented defense attorneys and should do that. The goal is, however, to try and bind you to the things that we helped you suggest you apply for and in the tiers that they were designated to. So that's that. So are we ready to take these votes, or do you want me to go back through the tiers and the assumptions? These were the assumptions, the movements. Do we want to talk about any of these, the things we moved around? Or any of these, the assumption, the things we didn't put in the assumption? Any tier 1 requests you think we got wrong? Any tier 2 requests you think we got wrong? Any tier 3 requests you think we got wrong? If you don't interrupt me, forever hold your peace.
Joanna, I don't want to derail anything, but we've talked quite a bit about the new attorney requests. And I just wanted to hit on that. I know they're generally going to be new full-time, new positions, which is hard to keep carrying on. But those are pretty crucial for a lot of what we're doing. And the reason we've identified them, we as staff identified them as tier 3, unless they're in a tier 1 or 2, is because they don't help that managerial function. But they certainly are crucial to a lot of other things. So that may be obvious to everyone, but I do think it's important because there's an awful lot of systems that are asking for attorneys is a very important need.
Yeah, that's a good point, Adam. We, in our preliminary discussions in Davis County, and especially with our criminal justice system, we see for sure a prioritization of attorneys moving forward and from whatever money we get from this American Recovery.
Okay, I just wanted to see if there was more discussion on it, but thanks.
Okay.
One of the things that I think is interesting about the tier designation process that you've got here, all people renewals are tier 1 or 2 for this year of grant funding, right? And then there are these new positions that get categorized as tier 1, 2, or 3 based on whether they help the managing defender. But once you get another person on a grant, next year are all renewals going to again be tier 1 and 2, and will slowly tier 1 or tier 2, if we use this model in the future, grow to be so large that there's no room for anything else? I mean, as staff, you've probably given some thought to that. Do you have anything to share with us on the sustainability of that model, or are we just being very specific about this for this given grant cycle?
If I can answer that, I think we touched on it a little bit last time. That's not to say we fully discussed it, but this is principle 1, right? The capacity of the system. And once we build that, ideally that will have that structural and resource capacity, right? It will be established that we can better identify the additional needs we need. I think one of 2 things may happen. One, we may just have to build upon this may become our base budget of things we just renew, as you suggested, Michael, because that meets principle 1, and then the next amount that we request is for principles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, A, B, and C. Or the managing defender is so valuable and so critical that the system miraculously finds money to fund this managing defender and entrench them permanently in their system, which I think, as much as I'm sort of sounding jokey about that, may not be, because it is a real value, right? Davis County has done it. Salt Lake has done it. Weber County has done it. It is a valuable point to the system. And as systems grow and populations increase, right? And as our message has gotten out there, I think it may happen. So I think that's a discussion for next year, right? Absolutely. And how we go to the legislature in January and request the next round of funding. I don't have a simple answer to it, but I have a maybe. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Or just interrupt Michael.
Oh, that's a good question and yeah, a helpful answer to me, Joanna.
I mean, I think it seems to me that maybe we do double down on principle one. If you think of prosecution any place, there is a point person who handles that and who relates to the local government. And to have sort of relatively autonomous, independent, part-time defense counsel means that there is no loci, no locus of the defense function in the minds of local government, in the minds of the citizenry. And structurally, it probably does make sense over time to think that what will, in the long run, provide the best ground for the development of an effective defense function, not simply in the courtroom, but in the courthouse, in the commission chamber, in the mayor's office, is a person who can relate and who is the one who speaks for that function in government. So I think, what Michael said earlier, and sort of thinking about what do we do down the road, because we're going to have tier 3 stuff coming out our ears forever. And people are always going to want us to pick up local costs that are random, that they can sweep into this category. That maybe we double down over time on the tier 1, the principle 1. Because we're never going to have enough money for all the rest of the stuff.
Something Texas does is to divide their grants into categories like sustaining grants and innovation grants. And that might be what we do also, right? This base funding goes to the sustaining of organizational capacity, and then the additional funding goes to innovation, and that may be tier 3 and in all its parameters and permutations.
To do with those innovation grants too, they phase them out over 4 years is the idea, right? So it's like 100% the first year, 60, 20, 0 type thing.
In Salt Lake County, when Rich asks for money in a public defender system that has a strong managing public defender, where will his grant application be? In tier 2 and 3? I mean, it's not going to be tier 1, is it?
So with the request that he made, all of those renewal requests, which is the majority of his requests, would be tier 1 for the reasons laid out here. And then he has additional attorney requests that don't help with managing defender capacity. And so then those would go into tier 3. And right now, that one's a little funky because those actually fall under Salt Lake City and Mill Creek instead of Salt Lake County. So just if you see that on the items list, that's the way that's broken down.
But for them being renewal requests, though, they'd fall under tier 3 for the most part, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me like for this year, because we've already talked with all of the interested parties about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, asked them to identify it falling into those tiers, and that those were going to be priorities for us. We've got a pretty good sense that we can move forward with prioritizing tier 1, right? I don't know if any of the other commissioners have thoughts about whether or not prioritizing tier 1 over the other tiers means funding it 100%, though. We haven't really talked about the specifics of that. And I know that's another vote that we would need. Leslie, you mentioned you had a tool that you could kind of show us a little bit what that might look like. And maybe it's helpful if we see some of that in order to help us feel more comfortable making this tier designation vote that you're asking for right now.
I can go ahead and steal that screen share. Okay. You guys see my screen? So I have a couple different ways to display it here. This one, which I can make a little bigger, is super simple. So just each tier, how we fund it. So at this point, if we fund tier 1 and tier 2, and then funded every single tier 3 item, each tier 3 item would get 12%. So if you had a $100,000 request, you'd get $12,000. That's an option. And then this box down here shows, well, renewals and new, and then total funding available, total funding allocated via this model, and then essentially how much in the red we are. But to get to much more specifics, there's a lot on one page. So while we play with this page, we're probably going to get a little dizzy, but this is the same idea, but breaking everything down into its categories and its tiers. So over here, we have tier 1 broken down by the renewal items and then the new items. And so, for example, again, we could decide to fund all renewal items at 100, all new items at 80, and then continue down to tier 2 and do similar things, and then continue down to tier 3 and play around with if there are any categories. Like in previous years, we have not funded compensation increases. If there are any categories you just want to set at 0, we could play around with that as well. And then this box down here tells us a similar thing. So out of the 5.6 funding million, with whatever way we've set these things, how much money do we have left to play with? Play with sounds a little offensive, but how much money do we have left to make decisions on?
If in the tier 1 category, how much is going to non renewals of what we did before? So prioritizing managing defenders, which seems to be a true tier 1, not a renewal tier 1, but what we're prioritizing. Our big goal is, as we've talked about it, it looks like it's under $1 million, well under $1 million, maybe 500,000.
For yes, Joanne's slide, stolen it back. As this summarized better.
There's the breakdown, Ryan, of exactly, I think, your question.
And the support staff, does that go with the managing defender support staff, or is that other support staff?
Yeah, those are all requests that are specifically for managing defenders. So like in Utah County and their outer county programs, it's support staff that, and Uinta, support staff that does some of that, like assigning of cases, tracking of data, helping the managing defender with reporting. All of those duties is the intended purpose of those positions. And so the current renewals, that's what they're doing.
So in the current renewals, just over 800,000, like 820,000 when you combine managing defender and support staff. And then in the new request, managed defender support staff, you're at like 330. So you're at like 1.1 million, 1 point something million in what we're saying, absence renewals, because I know those are important. This is what our new focus, this is what we want to fund first.
Yes, with some nuance that these attorney positions that are in tier 1 are ones that have been specifically identified to take cases off of our managing defenders. So we have quite a lot of managing defenders who have 100% caseload, which like just doing some time math, you're not going to have any ability to do anything else. And so they would take, 30% of that caseload or something like that.
And Leslie, those are the new attorneys over there on the left, that 226, or are some of the renewal attorneys also speaking to that, offloading the burden on the managing defender?
So it is just the new attorneys, but our thought process on the old attorneys is that if any of those attorney contracts were to be terminated, in theory, the managing defender would get burdened with that contract, which we know from especially Pam and Margaret that when their attorneys leave, their caseloads go up. But we know that's a little bit more of a gray area.
And
Can I
speaking
just
of
ask-
Pam, go ahead, Pam. You had your hand up for a while.
Well, and as Joanna always says, like, embarrassed whenever we have to talk about math in front of people here, but I think the thing that I can't wrap my head around is when you have people asking for personnel, I don't know how we only partially fund it, because I don't, like, if I ask for an attorney and I said I need $50,000 to have an attorney, and then you came back and said, great, we'll give you $30,000, I would be like, I don't know what I can do with $30,000.
Yeah. So I
mean, I
think
think the problem to me is if we're talking about funding, sorry, Leslie, but if we're talking about funding personnel, I mean, sometimes you can do stuff like that with resources, right? Like this much, or maybe we could do something with the compensation. Although, like, as Margaret said, I mean, hiring people right now is very, very difficult. And I think my office pays less than Margaret's office. And, but so, I mean, the compensation thing is super hard just because, and I know Rich has the same thing too, like LDA's or Salt Lake County Attorney's Office, I think hires at a much higher rate than your office right now, Rich. I don't know if you guys were able to bring it up, but so that's a whole issue in and of itself.
Yeah.
I just don't know how you fund, I don't know how you fund half of an attorney.
so. There are a couple thoughts we have about this, but hearing from people who are actually doing this work, of course, makes a lot more sense. But we know that in some ways, Salt Lake and Utah County are unique in that you guys have some of the few completely full-time public defenders. And so in some other counties, it is actually possible to fund like a half-time contract. Like that's a common contract, a half-time contract or 75% contract. So that is one option, is that idea. And I don't know if that would be an option for your office. But then the other option is what we've been hoping for all along, and is that the system would come back and meet this need, but we know that is frequently unlikely. And then also this option of federal money. So that's where my thinking is at least on these.
Do we want to go back to Leslie's tool? Where do we want to go next? The calculation tool. Leslie's tool sounds weird. The graph that Leslie developed. Allocate funding.
I would say if we, going back here, I think deciding about renewals, making that decision first makes it a lot easier to make the rest of these decisions, because if you count through each of these 100% bars that we could play with, there are a lot, but if we just go through and decide about renewals, that clears some of that decision-making down, pares it down.
So the renewals for tier 1 and 2 would be 3.85356 for tier 1, and tier 2 renewals would be 547. So total of, I mean, that's really the biggest majority of our funding, to Michael's prior question.
You want a motion?
Well, we built that into the process. So if the motion is to approve that, you could do it as part of approval of the process. But if you don't approve of that, then yes, it probably needs to be a separate motion. Or it could be a separate motion either way. I am not the chair of this. I should stop speaking.
Well, it's helpful for me to hear what you think you need. Yeah. I guess before a motion, I will just share a county perspective that when we have hired people to take care of that priority one, I'm just speaking in general, all counties, as we have hired people to take care of priority one, and if that is still the priority, it's very, unless the IDC has always communicated that we don't know we'll be able to sustain funding for that indefinitely, then I think it throws the budget process for a loop to have taken that step and then just wonder what to do if you're one of those, well, the majority of many counties that just doesn't have a lot of funds. So that's a thought that's in my head.
So I'd move we approve the renewal of the tier 1. Renewal.
All right, so motion to approve the renewal of tier 1 by Michael Zimmerman. You have a second?
I think it just needs to be slightly more if it's going to be an individual motion, because it's not just all tier 1 or 2 items.
Sorry, I don't think I understood that, Joanna.
Michael said to approve. Can I hear your motion again, Michael? Sorry.
Okay. I guess you're wanting me to go to tier 1 and 2.
Well, it's just specific to people, right? That's what we built in there.
Right. Okay, I'll make that motion.
Okay, that all people renewals
Yeah.
are part of
Yeah.
tier 1 and tier 2. And that we approve that tier designation.
Now that's the motion.
Okay,
This is Sean, I'll second.
all right. I have a motion and a second. Would you like a roll call vote, Joanna? Is that best?
Can we have just a little discussion?
Oh, for sure. Sorry, Ryan. We should absolutely have discussion. Go ahead.
No, and I wasn't going to say anything, but I might have got an invitation to unmute because someone might know how I think. I'll just say I support the motion. I'm going to vote yes for it. But we do have to address at some point, if we're always going to do renewals, we will run out of ability to get new people in. And if the people that are in now, going to your point, Chair, rely on that to fund their present programs, it means they're not upping their internal funding to ever get to a level of sufficiency so that the money they've been using can be released and help others get to that level. Maybe others don't need to. There's a big conversation there. I don't mean to have the big conversation. I wasn't even going to say anything, but a little screen popped up. I do think we have to address that problem or that situation at some point. At least Leslie's nodding, so. But with that, I do sustain the motion. I think that's the right thing to do. That's the expectation we've given. If we want to address it, I think we address it in the off season, so to speak, for next year's grant.
Thank you for that. Any other discussion or thoughts?
So, Madam Chair, the only thing that I would say is, although I am in supportive of the motion, because of the omnibus nature of the motion that impacts funding to my office, I think I probably need to abstain from voting. Although I'm not exactly sure, but it seems as though I may have to abstain from voting because of the general broad nature of the motion that does impact funding that does come to specifically to this office.
That was going to be exactly my question is, do Rich and Margaret and I all need to abstain? Which does not help us out, quorum wise.
So our administrative rule on conflicts, I can pull it up, but I think I have it tattooed on the back of my mind, says that if it affects your pecuniary interest directly, you need to abstain from an actual vote. If we decide that that is true, then these will just be recommendations to the full IDC, and we'll have to get, which is neither here nor there, an additional, we would be one short of a quorum without you all.
But 1 and 2 wouldn't impact, I'm not in there, am I? Because I asked for a new person to help balance, because we're talking renewals, right?
Leslie's looking, I can tell, to see if we can break this down a little further to have actual binding votes.
I was just going to say, I'd be willing to break the motions down in such a way as to move pieces in and out so that we could sustain a quorum rather than having to go back and redo this with the whole.
I have just looked it up, and Pam has no renewal things. So Pam's interests are not affected by this vote.
Does Davis County have any renewal?
No, they don't. They did not have a grant last year.
Okay, Margaret Lindsay, does Utah County?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So before we take the vote, can you just remind me, Joanna, what have we said to grantees before about whether or not they should expect or have an expectation that there will always be renewal? What has been our story? What have we broadcast to grantees? Haven't we said that, look, this isn't going to last forever and you need to pick up the slack?
Nope. Ryan Luce has been saying that since I was hired on October 3rd, 2016.
One person might have tried to give that impression, but as a commission, I don't think we have.
And the reason for that is we never would have gotten them on board if we had led with that, right? And the other reason for that is this is the state's responsibility, and the argument is that the state is funding this and should maintain that responsibility, and that's what we've been arguing to the legislature in turn. And until we receive notice from the legislature that will not continue. And we did receive a little bit of notice this year, right? We got $1 million of our funding is one time. So we know $1 million of these requests will only be one time, which means we're going to have to go through this process again, depending on what happens with our funding next year. So
can I just say another reason is the great job Joanna has done in getting more money every year, and Senator Weiler and others. It's grown the pie, so we've never faced the real question.
We also have contract language in all of our grants that say dependent on state funding. So we are also lawyers at base and have never promised what we don't have. We just haven't led with that.
Well, like Ryan said, someday in the future, we'll kick the can down the road right now. But in order to be able to fund initiatives, we'll have to address that subject sometime in the future.
I think he makes a good point, and Leslie does, about the Texas system. But the question is, when have we built enough institutional investment at the local level in the program that the local government feels a need to actually step up? You know, when's the tipping point where our withdrawing a little money doesn't kill off a chick?
And ideally, that's another advantage to having a managing defender, having someone there who can advocate for the resources that are really needed.
I'd like to add, I guess I don't accept that premise that the counties and the cities need to step up more, because as Joanna said, this is a state responsibility and it's our task to get more and more funding. We may not fund everything forever, but the fact is that ought to be our push. Counties have put a lot of money in, right? $35 million statewide. When we get $35 million of state funding, I think then we do start talking about how others step up. Maybe that's overly hopeful, but at least it's a guiding principle.
You won't hear objections from cities and counties.
Yeah, I mean, I do think a lot of the counties have stepped up too, that have, that are involved. I think my county, definitely, there's been a difference in terms of their ability, their willingness to contribute, to increase our budget the last few years since our involvement. So it's far from perfect, but I'd like to think that we're gaining ground on a good balanced system, hopefully, where state and local governments and are each contributing greatly to indigent representation and defense, and our system statewide is strengthening because of it.
May I briefly revisit the idea of who needs to abstain from this? We're not actually voting on money right here. We are voting on tier designations. In the subsequent vote on tier 1 and 2, the funding that is allocated to them, the percentage would be more directly related to pecuniary interests. So I think Rich and Margaret, it's not my decision to make, may be able to vote on this motion.
Oh, yeah, good point. I looked up the meaning of the word pecuniary, which is relating to or consisting of money. So there you go. This one does not really deal with the money. So yeah, it sounds like maybe we could all vote. So we've had a motion and a second, and we've had a good amount of discussion. Any other discussion before we go ahead and take votes? Okay. Joanna, do you want to just go down the roll? Is that the easiest way?
Let's just do any nays and any abstentions.
Okay. So let's see. Everyone in favor of the motion approval, then please say aye. Aye. And if there are any who do not approve of the motion, please say nay. Okay, and I don't see any hands or anything else, so it sounds like it's unanimous.
Any abstentions?
If you are abstaining, please say your name.
So
Okay.
Joanna, your interpretation is that this just is relating to tiers as opposed to direct money. Is that what your legal interpretation of that is?
It is.
So you'll sort of stand up and defend that?
Rich, if everyone else voted yes and you have any hesitation, you may abstain without consequence.
Okay, no, I'm fine with it. If that's what we're doing, I'm fine with voting in favor of that.
Yeah, great. Oh, great discussion. Okay, so then the second one, we need to figure out renewal and new requests for non-contract items. Defense resources and mileage are examples, and compensation increases are all tier 3. And if there's somebody who would like to make a motion, I'll accept one.
Wait, I'm sorry, I was distracted. You're asking for a motion on what issue?
The number 2 bullet. Still just part of the tier designation process. Defining.
This is Pam. I will make a motion that we make non-defense resources, mileage, and compensation increases tier 3.
Okay, thank you, Pam Vickery. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion. This is Michael Drexel.
All right, thank you. Any discussion to the motion? Okay. Hearing none, then I think we are ready to go ahead and vote. We'll do it similarly. All of those who are in favor to approve the motion, go ahead and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And if you are opposed, please say nay. And are there any who need to abstain? Okay, yeah, we're not talking any money there either. Good, thanks everyone. Then the last one is new people requests are tier 1, 2, or 3, depending on the intent to apply impact to the managing defender workload.
Does that need any more explanation? It's a bit of a shorthand.
I was actually going to ask how it was determined that it has impact. What criteria did you use to categorize those?
Leslie, do you want to explain that?
So it was only requests where they specifically mentioned that caseload would be taken off of the managing defender in terms of attorneys. And then for support staff, it was support staff that again would be specifically taking on an administrative burden that currently falls to a managing defender.
I want to add too that we had those discussions with every one of the systems we met with, right? Both in the collaborative discussion and then as staff beforehand with the lead attorney. So we didn't just throw it out there and say, explain it. There's been a good deal of discussion, which is, I think, helpful, and it's guided Leslie and Greg's decisions on those.
And a lot of that deals too with how much time they said their managing defender spends on caseload, which went in, it came from the system needs evaluation and went into those discussions of, does your managing defender spend 100% of their time on their caseload? Do they spend 10% of their time on caseload? So what help do they need to reduce that and to be able to perform these managing defender responsibilities?
Great, thank you. All right, if there's anybody who's ready to make a motion.
So move.
Very good. Michael Zimmerman has moved approval. Is there a second?
I would second the motion.
From Wally, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, then we'll go ahead and take a vote. All of those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And are there any opposed? Say nay. Okay, and are there any who need to abstain? All right, looks like those are all approved. Thanks, everyone. That was great.
Thank you. Okay. So that means we have those tiers set. Sorry. Just to review. These are what the tiers currently look like. Tier 1, 4.4, Tier 2, 874, Tier 3, 19. So now, knowing that those are how they're broken down, we're faced with this decision again to fund percentages of each tier and what percentages those will be. And it may help in this discussion to go back and just look at the Tier 3 and what is available right now if you fund 100% of Tier 1 and 2. Again, we'll have a quick discussion around other ways to fund Tier 3, but right now that's the impact on Tier 3 if we fund Tiers 1 and 2 at 100%. Other questions? Do we want to see Leslie's Excel sheet? Do we want to
See that Tier 3 slide again?
And this is not saying we will fund all those Tier 3 items, right? You're just saying that this will be the available funding if you do 100% of the other tiers.
Could we cherry pick some of those?
So we're not dealing with Tier 3 specific categories just yet, but yes, we may when we get there. But it will require you to do this vote first before you know what to cherry pick.
Okay, so here is the funding, two questions, the funding percentage by tier and the allocation of IDC funding by tier.
And truthfully, that is one and the same vote.
Okay, I was just going to ask, what's the difference? Okay.
It's just, if we want to go through this and say we're going to fund a percentage of each item in Tier 2 or Tier 3 other than 100. So you tell us what you want to see next to make that decision.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Oh, yes, Ryan.
I know this meeting kind of got thrown together from a requested small meeting, and then the small group was going to make recommendations to the bigger group. I just don't want anybody to feel like they were left out, because I know some of our members couldn't come to this meeting. Were we intending to do the funding in this meeting also? Was that the original intent, or did we have a meeting scheduled for that and we were going to decide the tiers in this meeting? I'm just trying to refresh my memory on that.
So if I can answer that, those votes are both really critical to what we then next communicate to the systems about what to apply for. So they can't really be, they could be parsed in theory, but they can't really be parsed if we're going along this path, because then we would have, great, we've identified all these things, but we haven't allocated the money to it. That being said, there may eventually be some flux in these amounts depending on what comes in and what you decide, but this is the communication that we will give to systems about how much is available in each of these categories, and therefore what we think they will or will not receive from us in their intent to apply, which is intended to encourage them to look for other sources for that money and to apply for exactly what we have suggested they should apply for.
And that was kind of the intent, even when this was going to be a small group, would be to recommend all this to the IDC, then do the actual funding to individual grant request in a later meeting.
Right, and we will get back together and look at those grant applications. The IDC will, I think, you are the IDC right now because you're a quorum, right? The quorum is a binding vote of the members of the IDC, but when the applications come in, there will be more opportunity to have eyes on, right? The full process.
I'm just making sure Heather and some of the other ones don't say, what'd you guys do while we weren't there? So
Heather's in Disney World, so I'm not sure she gets to weigh in.
no, she told me there are others. We'd started off as one meeting and it kind of morphed, which is great. We're getting more done. I just want to make sure I understood.
Yeah. Good question.
Right. So I see it as we are getting an intermediary decision so that we know how to communicate to the grantees, right? Okay. All right, good. So
but this intermediary decision does affect, in large part, how much they will get. I mean, we're sending more than a signal. We're sending, I mean, other than cherry picking, like was mentioned, people can pretty much figure out where they're going to be by this decision. This is determining what the bulk of the money, 80, 90% or more.
And just to review, that's why we did all that front end collaboration, right? To really tie it in. And remember, when we didn't do all that, we got way too much in requests that was way outsized. So they are aware that it is tight and aware that we have told them how we will be working through this.
great. All right. So we've discussed quite a bit. I'm not sure if anyone is prepared to make a motion.
We discuss, well, let's make the motion and then discuss who might need to abstain, and this may end up being a full IDC vote anyway, Ryan.
Yeah.
Unless we make separate motions to have a quorum vote on different parts.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I personally support the idea of 100% funding of tier 1 and 2. But I wonder if we shouldn't wait and have the full IDC or a greater representation before we make that decision, understanding that it is committing the bulk of the money at this point.
So
I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, thank you, Wally.
I have a question, Lorraine. If I'd hate to have to redo everything for the whole IDC. Could we, I guess the whole IDC can redo whatever we do here today, so. But it would seem to me that the neatest package to send to the IDC would be the resolution that we approach the funding of tiers 1 and 2 the way we did, and the question of percentages for 1 and 2 would be then thrown to the whole IDC, because it does have that impact on tier 3. And if everybody wants 99% of 1 and 80% of 2, then that throws more money into 3 if they think that's what they'd like to do. I don't know that we can control that, although all of these are unanimous votes. But it would seem to me that would at least expedite things for the whole commission. Otherwise, we just have to start over. I don't know if we can do that procedurally.
Yeah, I do think that was the purpose of this group, was to make a recommendation, right?
Well, the ideal would be a binding recommendation, precisely what we're asking you to do, you're having doubts about. But when you say the IDC, the people who are not currently present are Senator Weiler, Representative Ferry, Sam Alba, Tom Ross, and Heather Schriever.
5 people.
You are the majority.
And so to the degree we're unanimous, we're a majority of the entire commission.
I'm withdrawing my hesitation.
I will add too that the applications will come before the commission, the full commission, or whoever's there again for you to review. So you're taking a position and a structural approach, and yet the process still has to involve a follow-up. If I'm assuming everyone on staff agrees with that, that is your final responsibility.
Yeah.
This may all be for naught if 3 of you have have to abstain.
I was going to say, we may not have a quorum if we have certain abstentions, which is understandable. Based on what we've already decided by vote, could we look again, Leslie, at your tool on the eligible items that could be adjusted percentage wise, and what change it may make in terms of, like, if we went 90% on tier 1, just being totally random at picking a percentage, but what does that do with available money down the pipeline for other requests?
And Michael, with your question, I'm going to bring up Pam's question again, just to refresh my memory. If that splits, if a county then doesn't even get a full amount for a position, remember she said she doesn't know quite what to do with that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so maybe even it's better to be more nuanced even than just 90% across all of tier 1, and say, what if tier 1, all of the renewals are 100%, but for new positions, if it's not necessarily, is there some nuance that we can build into this a little bit? And what does it change in terms of that tier 3 and what we may want to do with tier 3 categories if there's a need? I'm just trying to get my head around what flexibility or latitude there is to adjust that $280-something thousand remainder if we make changes. Because if it's a very minor amount, then maybe it doesn't matter that we make changes upstream, you know?
May I ask a question to that point? Would it help to decide tier 3 first and look at the things that we might just categorically say no to up front, so that you feel less pressure to decrease or increase the amount of available tier 3 funding? Because I think tier 3 can be reduced, and there is that possibility of other federal funding and other state or local funding.
That's a good idea.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, but before we leave Leslie's sheet here, do you want to just run through a quick example just to keep, so they have it in their mind, Leslie?
So doing what we've just done, which is, or what Michael Drexel just recommended, which is 100% for renewals, 90% for new for tier 1 and tier 2, gets you about, I believe, $100,000, $150,000 more for tier 3. And so if you want to look at like specific buckets that could be funded, you know, that could fund about 1/3 of a social worker, 30% time social worker for all of these requests is one way to do this. And so you could decide that for tier 1 and tier 2, things get the same percentage across the board, for example, that, and then decide that in tier 3, different categories get different percentages. And some of these categories, again, using the example of compensation increases, which we haven't been allowed, they haven't been allowed to be funded in previous years. Just getting a zero immediately knocks out $210,000 of funding requests. That's a way to.
Is
Could we-
this a good time to ask again what categories or of tier 3 we think would be eligible for the federal funds?
Yeah, we know it's one time, no matter what the guidance is from Treasury, we know it's one time and we know it has to be tied to COVID. So it would be, the way I would see that is dealing with the backlog of cases or case.
We could call, defense resources, I assume, or attorneys or anything that's tied to that in part, right?
Defense resources includes things other than attorneys, but yes. So attorneys, so something I had thought of was like 2,000 hours of 150 an hour of attorney time, and we would find attorneys who would be able to work on an hourly basis across the state.
Right. Or, investigators that hours because of all the cases that are set for trial and need of investigation. Or
The immediate problem I see, and I know this is what the courts are also potentially hoping to see, is that the threat of a jury trial may resolve those cases. So it may be a little bit of an unknown, but.
Well, and I can tell you, we're seeing that already. So in Salt Lake County, they have 2 courtrooms that are outfitted currently for doing jury trials, and they're setting 20 trials deep for those every day. And they'll have days where 1 or 2 of those go is all. And the rest have some either last minute settlement or some new plea bargain. Very few continuances are being granted on trials right now, trying to really help people come to the decision point. And so we're seeing a lot of those settle out.
Can we see the list of tier 3, Leslie?
I think it's right there.
Is this what you're looking for? Or you're looking for something else?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Lots of other interesting conversation.
So attorneys that don't take load off of the managing defender, right? And then just the history that we've never, as an IDC, funded compensation increases, right? Defense resources, investigators considered tier 3. Mileage is tier 3. Operating expenses, tier 3. A social worker, and support staff and
No,
technology.
it's got to be multiple social workers, right?
Yes.
Isn't it like 9?
9? Okay.
Didn't
End of that.
dollars out by getting rid of the attorneys and the compensation increase.
Can I say one thing about the compensation increase, just really quickly? As you saw when you reviewed the intent to apply, some of them specifically identified separate compensation increases. Some of them just built it into their request for the attorney. So not funding those involves some decrease in the award amount, but it's based solely on the math of what is a compensation increase over last year. Does that make sense? It's sort of a distinction without a difference. Carry on. Ignore Joanna on that one.
So to answer your question, we went from, what was it? Almost 2 million. And if you subtract that, it's down to $1 million of requests. So just getting rid of those first 2 options does decrease it by a lot. Although that's definitely painful. Like we know there are too few attorneys in Utah, like working on this stuff, that's a known. But these are all hard decisions. It's how prioritization works.
I would look at operating expenses also.
Yeah.
Both operating and expenses and tech, as Joanna showed on her side. So they each are one system request. So operating expenses is rent and overhead from Utah County, and tech is computer and other requests from Lisa Locken's office in Salt Lake County.
Which may potentially be Title IV eligible for funding.
Like it's, I suppose, somewhat the tech could, I don't know if it's COVID related or not, but. Yeah, I would say, just for fun, let's zero out those.
Margaret, to your question on tech, I know in the first CARES Act funding for cities, counties, government entities, if it facilitated work from home or anything like that, remote working in any way, then it was clearly COVID and they funded a lot of it. So you could use it. I don't know what the purpose of tech is, but that I would guess would qualify.
Adam, can you talk about this, the 21-4 at all?
Maybe we lost him for a minute.
Okay, so
Sorry, my keyboard was not working for some reason. I apologize. Yes, I can. It really is just for upgrades to computer and other tech equipment for Lockton's office. It's not specifically related to COVID issues, but it could be. And so this seems like something they threw in because it hasn't been funded recently. It's also would be eligible for reimbursement under Title 4E, which they're getting a lot of money for also.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Then I had a question of just out of curiosity, if we put in the new attorneys and social workers both at 50%. It's just
We do that and zero out compensation. That's
close to what?
most of the way there. Wait, no, that's not. Sorry, this math is not. No, we're still $750,000 over, which is a lot
To
less
come up
than-
with that, we would have to fund tier 1 or tier 2 new requests at like 70% or 60%, which exacerbates the problem that Pam identified in terms of funding just a percentage of positions.
Yeah, I mean, Pam's point is it is definitely easier to fund defense resources at a percentage than it is to fund a person at a percentage for sure.
Yeah.
And investigators too can be grouped into defense resources and paid on an hourly basis, right? What if we do 50 on defense resources and investigator in tier 3? And that the support staff positions, one of them, is it 1 or 2?
I think it is only
I have it as 4 systems asking for that amount.
for tier 3. It's just the Iron, Cane, Beaver, and Parowan asked for 2 support staff. And so the secondary one got moved to tier 3. And so it's just that single item. So
we could potentially zero that one out because they're already getting 1.
Chair, may I ask a question? We're kind of getting in the weeds, which I think is good, but because we're trying to give an expectation, if I understand right, to those who've given us an intent. Would it work, and I won't make the motion now, I want to know from staff and chair, to make a motion that we intend to suggest as the smaller group of the whole IDC to add the next IDC meeting that we fund tier 1 at 90% or more, and that we will be looking at these sorts of issues more in detail during that meeting to send that message, but not to get in the weeds as much now? Or is that just, does that not help? Because I think it'd be hard to figure it all out now, but if we need to, I guess we can.
Well, with tier 3, we don't necessarily have to dial it in exactly, but if we want to say we are not funding compensation increases and there's only this pot of money available for defense resources, that's going to help a system know what to apply for, right? There will be in tier 3, I think no matter how much we try and dial it in, there will be some shifting and some difference. So we may have to readdress this. The things you could say on tier 3 are we will not fund X category or Y category.
I-
I think the expectations though, going in based on all the meetings was that this is exactly what would happen with tier 3. Is that was my impression from the meetings with the systems that I attended.
I heard that
There's,
from the ones I attended. Adam, is
yeah,
that you?
yeah, sorry, Commissioner, didn't mean to jump in. The point I want to make too is, and we saw this on an earlier slide in Joanna's presentation, when we're looking at tier 3 items, if we all recognize they are tier 3 and we're trying to distinguish between them, not all systems ask for any one of these items, right? So not everyone asked for compensation increases. If you were to take that and say, sure, we'll fund all of that, you're not benefiting the system as an entirety, right? So the difficulty is if you say, well, we're going to fund X in tier 3 and not Y, some systems may really want to have X, but they didn't set that as a priority, they set Y. So I think categorical exemptions make sense, but as we start to dig into the detail, do be aware if you're taking money percentage from tier 1 and 2, you're now giving it to selected systems. So
Okay. Yeah,
I don't know if that helps or matters.
This is Pam, and I guess I would just say that too, or to Margaret's point and Lorraine's point, like that. I mean, what I understood when we had our meetings and stuff was what you guys have been talking about the whole time, right? Like there's a real investment from the IDC to do the managing, anything that supports managing Defender type systems and things like that. And we encourage applications for, or intents to apply for defense resources or what would be considered tier 3, because one, we're also making sure that the legislature knows that like while we're building a system, there is still so much more needed to build the system, let alone what's needed in order to support the system, right? So, I mean, I just think that that's worth considering that, and I don't know if Rich disagrees with me on that, but I kind of was given the impression we needed to identify tier 3s, but we weren't really expecting that tier 3 was going to get funded. Maybe I missed that. That's the way I interpreted what we were doing when we were applying for things.
Thanks, Pam. Yeah, that's my impression as well. Okay, where are we at, Joanna?
Trina, can I delete the Zoom recording of the last 2 meetings so that we have enough storage to keep recording this one? Just a quick housekeeping item. Katrina? Is that a yes?
So you want me to go delete those right now?
Well, I have it poised to delete, but you have them downloaded to the public meetings website?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You can either vote on tier 3 to your question, Commissioner, tier 3, or move to the funding allocations by tier.
Okay.
To block it out, I think there are kind of 3 different votes that we could and should do. And so one is tier 1 and 2, and then that can be split into renewals and new if you so desire. And the second one is, do you make a decision about the percentages of tier 3 or just communicate that that decision will be made later based on the amount of funding that's needed? I don't know if that's clear.
So what do we currently have tier 1 at on your spreadsheet right now on Excel?
So at least on this page, it's currently this way purely due to Michael Drexel wanting to utilize this to play around with this. So it doesn't have to be 190, but at the moment it is renewals at 100 for both tier 1 and tier 2 and 90% funding for new items for tier 1 and tier 2. And that gets us to between those 2 tiers, 5.26 million out of our 5.6.
And so, and by looking at tier 3, just to see if we could rule things out there, we've done some of that, right?
we've played around with doing that, but I think a
Yeah.
vote would be needed to
Yeah.
decide if any of these are actually not allowed.
Yeah, so just to refresh everybody on what we're looking at and what we've done. Yeah, the tool is awesome, Leslie. I mean, it's amazing.
It is.
Yeah,
Glad
okay.
it's the tool and you doing the math and not me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's wizardry right there.
Unless it's baseball stats, then I'm okay.
All right. Everyone has just been really thoughtful, and I'm grateful to all of you for it. So, anyone feel comfortable with motion for a particular recommendation?
I have to tell you, I'm a little bit, I know we have to make the cuts and everything and make some hard decisions, but I'm feeling a little discomfort in general over not making that tier 1 an absolute priority of funding. And I know the 90% gets us really close, and kind of on the fence about that, but I think we, under our approach and under our discussions with all of the systems, there was a reason why we made the tiers what they did. We did.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, I think that's right, Margaret. And it only picked us up $100 and something thousand to utilize within tier 3 requests. It wasn't, I mean, it's money, but it's not like it moved the world in terms of expanding and opening additional opportunities inside of tier 3. So leaving it 100% through tier 1 and tier 2, based on how we've structured this with everybody already, makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I think the commitment we have to be programmatic, although it creates emotional discomfort when you look at tier 3, is important because it will funnel choices in the future. It'll funnel applications in the future. And it's a strong statement of what we're doing. And I think the point about underfunding continuing things that we've already said are important sends the kind of message that we don't, we're trying to get local government to believe us, that we're here for the long run. And I don't think that helps to pull back a little.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I like a consistent message. And I also, there's been probably in all the years since the IDC has existed, a progression of how it all is moving. And some of the practical comments that some of you have made in your own jurisdictions are helpful too, that perhaps things are moving in the way that it's supposed to go with the consistent. And then also the other thought that occurs to me is the tremendous effort this year, this grant year, to work with every single jurisdiction very closely has been, I think, awesome. So all of that plays in, I think, in helpful ways with today's discussion. All right, well, we've had a few folks talk about their thoughts on fully funding tier 1, right? Tier 1 and tier 2? Yeah. So anyone, we'll have some discussion after a motion. Anyone willing to make that motion?
I would move that we provide 100% funding to tier 1 and tier 2.
Okay.
I second that motion.
All right, Wally was the motion, and then female
Mary,
Mary
Mary,
Corcoran seconded.
okay, very good. Mary, second the motion. Okay. Additional discussion on the motion.
Is that a narrow enough motion that we're not going to have enough abstentions that we don't have a voting body? It's a good motion. I will vote in favor of it, but I wonder if there are some who aren't in a position to vote and then we don't have a decision made.
You know, Mike, that would be my position. Because I have applications, or through Salt Lake County have applications for arguably 2, if not all 3 of the tiers, I would be abstaining from voting on this motion.
Okay. And let's see, how many do we need, or how many extra do we have, Joanna?
I believe we need 8. In fact, I know we need 8, and that would leave us at 9.
Okay.
Well, I would have to be an abstention too.
That would leave us at 8.
Anyone else need to abstain?
Won't I need to abstain also? This is Pam.
On how we think through this, all of your requests are tier 3.
Oh, okay, then I can vote.
However, yeah, I mean, the other side of this logic is this voting does affect how much funding goes to tier 3. So
just to clarify, on Pam's office does have a tier 1 request.
Oh yeah,
new funding.
that's what I thought. So I need to abstain.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you very much, Pam.
Could we?
gee.
Yeah, I guess we could at least make it a recommendation.
I would do that.
If we just made the vote a recommendation, that's what the full
Could I make,
commission adopt.
Someone was trying to
could
talk.
I make a motion that we approve all of tier 1 except the funding that is requested for Salt Lake County, and that as to Salt Lake County, tier 1 be reserved for further vote.
I'll second that motion. If the original motion person will accept the revision.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Is that real? IDC, does that work? I mean, staff, does that work?
It doesn't change that we would then still have to turn around and have a quick vote by more people on that, because we still have to communicate to Salt Lake County what they need to apply for, right?
I'll have another motion about Salt Lake County in a minute, but.
Well, yeah, I think the takeaway is that we're going to have, we can't just do an email vote because it's not in our rules to be able to do that. So we either have to have a phone call or a quick Zoom meeting to have a full vote, which I'm not sure we're going to be able to pull off, but.
Somebody see if we can catch Heather before she climbs on Tower of Terror or something.
I think we should give Mary, who's a clever defense lawyer, an opportunity to structure her motions in such a way as to box out results.
Thank you for your vote of confidence.
I wish that I could say this on the record, but I can't say it on the record, so I won't say it in a meaningful way, but how would Sitla vote here?
How would, who?
Trust lands?
I didn't
Yes,
say.
the legislative requirement is that you disclose your conflict and then you vote anyway, so.
Ah, there you go.
I am
Of
not.
course, this is not them.
Yes, we have a conflict policy. So what was that motion?
Can someone clarify for me? Isn't there one component of this tier 1 which is entirely Utah County?
If we were to disallow particular tier 3 categories, there would be one that is just Utah County.
Well, but I think for both tier 1 and 2, if we had one vote that was not Salt Lake County and one vote that was not Utah County, I think we would have a quorum on both of those votes.
My point exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, as that, I don't know if that's how it works. I'm still new to government, but
Okay,
We would still have to have the full IDC vote on Salt Lake and Utah counties is the problem with that. But,
I think they could reciprocally vote on
There
each
you
other.
go.
oh, I see.
She's asking Rich to abstain from one vote and then asking Margaret to abstain from the
Yeah.
other.
Got
I
it.
think that's where Mary was going.
I am.
Thank you. Yes.
It's a pretty
exactly.
cute way to do it, but I think it's legal.
No, I get that. I mean, I think part of the problem is there is, in my mind, some questions about our application and whether a certain request fits in category 1, 2, or 3. And so that does create, in my mind, a continuing reason for abstaining, because there will be some questions about which one of the categories our application fits into. And so from my perspective, I think that creates a universal conflict.
But we still may have a few spare ballots lying around.
But I do also think Richie voted to accept the tier designations already. But we could go back and discuss that one particular item. Or you could not worry about it and then just address it in the application.
Yeah, I mean, I probably will still abstain, just because I do think it does have an impact on what that looks like, and I want to err on the side of caution, I think. So I would abstain.
okay.
And for what it's worth, I don't know if this is helpful at all. It's probably not. But in terms of process, I get that we could probably get to certain motions that might get us to certain results today, but I wonder whether or not we ought to explore trying to get a few other commissioners together and reconvene this. I know time is hard, but I would love for all the motion making to be consistent and not rely on kind of the narrow kind of slice and dice it motion to get to a result.
It could be a recommendation, right? A recommendation to the IDC that the IDC, a full quorum votes on. The full quorum may end up being some version of the, well, will end up being some version of this. It will have to.
Right.
You're binding yourself to more work.
Right.
That goes to my original question. Since this was originally a small group meeting, we were planning to have the full quorum meeting and vote at some point. So with that, if the chair would accept a substitute motion, I move that we do, we recommend to the full body of the IDC funding tier 1 and 2 at 100%.
Okay, great. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, I think Michael Zimmerman was first on that. Okay, and any further discussion? If I understand it correctly, then what Ryan said in this motion, then this is a recommendation to the full IDC to be able to have everybody brought up what this recommendation means, so that we're not starting all the way over, going through everything we've done today with the full body, right? I mean, that's a no. But that we just kind of take this and then report that to everybody who will be there. We hope that we can get a few more, maybe at least Heather and whoever else, and then have our final vote. Do I understand that correctly? Okay, I saw a few of you nod.
Correct, Chair. That was my intent.
Okay, great.
As part of the recommendation, Ryan, did it also include everyone being available at, say, 7:30 a.m. Monday morning for a phone call vote?
You tell me when to be there, I'll be there.
Well, what we could do is have everybody grab their netting and meet at Fremont Island tomorrow. That would be a good time. But no.
Heather will still be in Orlando, I think.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you want to kind of look at calendars then? But I think
With that recommendation, I think the strong message to any applicant, depending on when we can get together, would be that is the full intent of the commission. But for some conflicts and some people being out of out of town on short notice, that would have been the intent or the vote of the IDC. And so the whole point is to give applicants predictability. I think through the discussion that's where the IDC is headed. If anybody disagrees, we probably should.
I think, yeah, well, we can work with that.
Oh, okay. Wow, great. Any further question or discussion then to that motion? Okay, wow, it's amazing what can happen little bit by little bit. Well, very good. So we don't actually need to take a vote on this then, Joanna, right? Or
I think it would be worth taking a vote. I don't think you need to abstain because this is just a recommendation.
okay. All right, very good. So everyone who is approving of this recommendation, please say aye.
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 All right.
Okay, very good. Anyone opposed to this recommendation, please say nay. Okay, there appear to be none. And has anyone still chosen to abstain? Okay, wow. Awesome.
Before anyone leaves, one last final consideration. Don't hit leave yet. This one will be quick. But we need to go back to those tier 3 items and decide if there are any that we are going to communicate to systems that this is a no-go, don't bother. I think this will be very helpful to systems. It may not be critical, but we've talked about the Title 4E funding being available for this one. We've talked about this being one system's request.
I think 4E funding may be available for that, some of that as well. I don't know.
Yeah. And then compensation increases. Are there categories that we want to say hard pass? Thank you so much. Maybe next time. Or do we want to leave it at tier 3? Look, we've only got this much money. You take it upon yourself to reduce your requests.
I'm curious, do people
We're gonna lose more people real fast?
yeah, we'll be fast here. I'm just curious, would it help those of you who are within systems if after this meeting that some things are just out? Seems like that might be helpful.
So should we ask people within the systems? I mean, if it were me, I would ding compensation increases, rent and overhead, mileage, tech, and leave the operative elements: investigators, attorneys, social work, support staff, and defense resources. That's just one dartboard.
Uh-huh.
Well, I mean, I feel like there's a couple categories I can't speak on, but I think if across the board, if we even told systems that, look, tier 3 is going to be incredibly limited, and this is where we think our priorities tier 3 would be in terms of general terms, I think that would be adequate.
So you could, instead of saying no to certain categories, you could say these items are our priorities in tier 3.
All right.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good.
Could we not just communicate that tier 3 is going to be incredibly limited and not make a decision now? Because just, for instance, I hear a lot of complaints from attorneys and investigators about the mileage issue, and that's a potential deal breaker in terms of getting competent people into the system. It's a relatively small dollar figure in the great scheme, and yet it's a sore point, just for instance. So maybe we should just tell people that it's going to be severely limited and then consider this at a later time.
Okay. From the faces I can see, looks like people are maybe agreeable to that.
with that, if they have questions about what may be limited, there's been a lot of discussion and suggestions if they want to look at this meeting.
Yeah, that's true too. Does that work for you, Joanna?
Yeah, we'll make sure the minutes are not as succinct as they have been, but are more explanatory.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good idea.
Or they could just watch it all.
Right.
Oh, they would be in for a good time.
Okay, we can work with that. I don't think that needs a vote. That is just a recommendation for communication. Is there anything else you feel like, knowing what you've seen so far, knowing what you know about systems, knowing that you will have renewal items and new items, is there anything else on the application that you want to make sure we are specifically asking for you to see? We will be communicating that the IDC has recommended tier funding for 1 and 2 at 100%, and tier 3 will be extraordinarily limited with certain categories that may not be funded at all. We always ask for an executive summary. It doesn't always get us what we want, so we've been trying to figure out how to ask for that better, right? So we actually understand what people are asking for. Some people give great detail and wonderful explanations, and others don't. And so it's figuring out the level of detail that we ask for. But is there anything else you feel like when you're looking at these applications and deciding based on all the quandaries you've dealt with today that you want to make sure in that application this year?
Jonah, let me ask you and staff, how confident are you in terms of knowledge of the organizational structure of every system?
You want me to start breaking it down for you?
No, I'm just curious if that's something that we get to and we say, hey, what does this look like? You can say, oh, well, in this county, it looks like this, because, I think when we're talking tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, I think where those pieces fit and what things look like, I would like to know. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that is something that we want to include in the executive summary, or if you and staff are confident that what that looks like and can help paint that picture for us.
It's a really good question. You have access to that in your materials from the system evaluation responses that Leslie sent out to all systems. That was in last week's meeting materials.
Yeah, that's gone in and out, so that's good to know. Okay, that's all I needed to know.
That to remind everyone of that. So we have a pretty good layout. Greg also we have caseload survey where we know who's on all the tracks.
Okay.
So we have that background information. The question more is how if they're gelling their understanding of a managing defender, something that will help a managing defender. If they're tying it into these tiers, right? If they're really understanding it the way we're understanding it, and we hope they are, and we think they are, but what else can we ask them to make that executive summary helpful to you?
Here's something that I'm thinking of, and executive summary based on people's experience or understanding of what that is can vary widely, and some are definitely very, very long. Personally, an exec goes back to school, right? An executive summary has this and this and this, and bullets are fine under each of those points. So if that seems helpful to folks, and then they are going to cover what we need to see in an executive summary, and they know that we love bullets, just to let that eye find exactly what we need. Those are thoughts that come to my mind.
We'll want to remind them it's the Sixth Amendment, not the Second Amendment, when we tell them we love bullets, but yes.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
I would like to know, but if this would scare people off, I'm okay not knowing whether they intend this to be an ongoing request or a one-time request from their point of view.
Oh, that's a great idea.
But if that puts them off, and that would scare people away, I don't want to scare people away. It's that fine balance we've been walking for 5 years now.
And we have previously asked them, if you're asking for this money, why can't the system fund it on its own? Right, Ryan, we haven't completely ignored your cries.
No, we've done our best, and maybe the more delicate way is are you making an ongoing or one time? But again, I don't want to scare anyone away or annoy them. it just may help us if we go to the system, which I really like the idea of that Leslie said, or that they're doing, was it in Arizona or Texas somewhere, of continual versus innovation. It may help us understand that.
Yeah, my one fear is that they might mistake it for an offer of ongoing funding, but
Yeah.
we'll make sure that is.
That's why I say, I'll leave it to your judgment. You know the systems better than I do. It would be, I would appreciate knowing, just know what their expectation is.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's most clear this year is these are one-time funds, right? They run July 1st to June 30th, and there's no guarantee that they will extend, but that has always been the case.
Knowing entities, at least some of the ones I deal with, that doesn't mean they don't think it's ongoing.
I mean, last year they found out it wasn't all ongoing, right?
Yeah. And some were quite upset by that, if I remember right.
I think you remember correctly.
Yeah. Any other comments from folks that they think might help applicants? Okay.
I think the staff deserves a great congratulations for coming up with all these ways of slicing and dicing,
Yes.
even though it makes the decisions harder.
And Leslie's tool was so fantastic.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, you'll get, as you go and look at documents too, as you get prepared, you'll see Greg and Leslie have broken things down so many ways that make it clear and easy to read. It's fantastic. So
It is.
I appreciate that.
Yes, you all need to know that each of you and what you're doing toward this is quite remarkable. And you've got a great team, Joanna.
I do have a great team, and I wish Adam and I could take most of the credit for this, because in the past, maybe we would have, but Greg and Leslie have been the brawn behind all of this, and they have put in countless hours.
Yeah, very true.
Well, Joanna, you can take credit for hiring them, so that's a plus, right?
Take it. I'll take it.
I mean, there's that drawback of Adam, but like we get it.
But I can reach things on a high shelf, so I'm all right.
Oh, you guys are funny. Well, very good. Will we call it a wrap? Take a motion to adjourn? Are we to there, Joanna?
Ryan, can you take a binding motion to adjourn if you don't have a quorum?
You lost, the meeting was technically adjourned from my point of view the second we lost the quorum.
Oh, good point.
I mean, because once you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting regardless. Not a legal meeting, which you can do anything.
Oh no, we have 8. 1, 2.
I was just gonna say, I've been scrolling. We might still have that quorum right there.
I'll call the question, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we're out of here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your time. It's wonderful.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Thank you,
it so
staff.
much.
And Margaret,
Yeah.
would you stay on for a minute?